we say in Hebrew, we say Yerida L'tzorech Aliyah, another basic Kabbalistic concept, which means that a descent or fall is only for the purpose of a climb, of an ascent.
Yes.
And that there's no such thing, really, when you think about it, as an actual fall. Because if the fall is just a necessary step to greater climbing, then that's just part of the climbing.
Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Machbitz. Rabbi, welcome to the show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Dude, thanks for being here.
Yeah,
I'm really excited to have this conversation. One, like right before we started recording, I told you this podcast is very self-indulgent. Mm-hmm. So I invited you over, one, hopefully so we can teach the people who watch or listen to this podcast more about Judaism, because I think that's extremely important. And in the same token, teach myself about it as well. Because right before we started recording, we did some tefillin.
That's right.
Which we'll get to what that is in a second. We can't start too big.
Yeah.
But my first question before we get into all of that is, one, how are you doing? Like, actually, how are you doing?
I'm good, thank God. Just got back from a long trip and settling back into life just for a few days because I'm off to Israel, actually.
Off to Israel?
In another week. So I'm not fully settled yet. But
so you were in New York for 5 weeks?
Yeah. And
then off to Israel?
Yes.
With the whole family?
Just me and my wife and her family.
And what's happening in Israel, or just going there because?
There's like a third birthday party for our nephew.
Okay.
It's like a Jewish ritual that you cut the hair only at 3 years old.
Oh.
It's an interesting little unknown custom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's the excuse. But yeah,
beautiful.
We want to be going there.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. My first official question is.
Okay.
You're a rabbi.
Right.
What does that mean?
Ooh. What does it mean to be a rabbi? Well, there's the technical answer, which means that you become proficient enough in some of the basic ideas and laws of Judaism to be able to guide others in those observances. That's a technical, just like if you're a lawyer, you've studied a certain amount of material to be able to answer questions about the law. Mm-hmm. To be a rabbi means to have studied a certain amount of material and be tested on it so that you're ordained as a rabbi. That's just a technical definition, but obviously it means more to people. And what a rabbi is a spiritual guide, someone who can hopefully guide each person that comes to them with some instruction and meaning and providing a roadmap for living. That's the job of any spiritual mentor, and a rabbi is no exception.
Hmm. Was being a rabbi always your path? Was that what you were supposed to do? What you wanted to do? Was it a combination of both?
A combination of both, in the sense that I grew up in that world. My father's a rabbi. Mm-hmm. He established the Chabad, the synagogue here in Plano, in 1994. So I've been here since then. Left for studying, left out of town to study from age 13 to like 20-something. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't really live here from age 13. But a lot of my family are rabbis, and that kind of seemed like the most ideal way to spend your life. That kind of was like the highest calling, was to be a servant of the community, and to be highly dedicated to the well-being of others, spiritually, materially. Yeah, we could get into it later, but that's more of specifically the Chabad phenomenon, or rather being raised as a member of the Chabad movement, which is very niche probably for your audience. But to drill down into it, that would be probably to better fully understand what it means to be a rabbi in my vein.
Mm. Yeah, because there's different sects of Judaism.
Right.
Which I think we should talk about. Mm-hmm. But I think one thing you mentioned, I think that's important, that I talk about a lot in this podcast, that can be sort of parsed out into any context, is trying to become that best version of you in greatest service of the world.
Right.
Whatever that looks like. Whether that is a mom, a kindergarten teacher, a coach, a rabbi.
Right.
I think that's important because, we're going to be around people, and young people too, and they're very impressionable. And if we can give them a strong role model to look up to something, to become something, that's extremely powerful. Because a lot of people nowadays have like sort of the opposite role model, like what not to become. Mm-hmm. So if we can give people what to become, I think that's extremely powerful. And what's something I think about a lot as a coach for youth, for young kids.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah, that's a basic Jewish belief, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, is that we're created as, with a mission, so to speak. That we're not sent down to the world to experience it or to have it happen to us. We're here as an ambassador, so to speak, of God Himself. That God created each individual human being with a divine soul, a divine part of Himself, so to speak, or rather literally, so that every human being is actually just an encasement for an actual fragment of God within them. And God brings that soul to the world so that each person should be an ambassador of His, of love, of peace, of compassion to the world around them. So that no one really is just a subject in life. We're all the authors of our own lives. We're all tasked with a mission to actually serve the world around us, our own little corner of the universe, our own little set of relationships that we're given, and the influence that we have in our little circle, whether it's large or small. This is a fundamental idea of Hasidic teaching, Kabbalistic teaching, which again is a little more niche, but the basic idea being that, yeah, we're here on a mission. And that's very empowering, because when you tell someone that, you're not just, life doesn't happen to you, but you're actually given, you're here on a calling.
Right.
You have a mission. Like every single person that you see, like the guy that you meet in the course of coaching baseball, or the people you meet in the grocery store, wherever they are, every single person has their task in this world and their responsibility to be this ambassador of light and love. It lends your life a lot more significance than it would be if you just think yourself as being some random mutation waiting for things to happen to you.
Right. Yeah, you have to step into the arena.
Right.
Yeah, you have to play the game.
Yeah. What it's about.
So I think a lot of people, I don't know, maybe a lot of people get missed by the spiritual when some people say that what is meant for you is coming to you. And I think that potentially is true. Maybe not so much Judaism wise, but just in a general spiritual way. Yeah. Especially on social media, people say that. And I think that's generally true only if you're actively doing out in the world doing the thing. Like if I'm just sat at home all day, well, what's coming to me? The same thing that I've been doing, whatever it is. But if I'm out in the world trying and reviewing and trying to iterate and execute and making relationships and trying to find my passion or what my hobbies might be, then yeah, the things are going to come. Right. Not all of them are going to be the perfect fit, but that's when you're like, okay, maybe that's not actually for me, but now I know I'm on the right path, and I just keep going, and then the right thing comes to me. So I think that's important. Yeah. Like you said, like taking responsibility, being the architect of your own life, while having like the sort of faith in the background, knowing that if you do fall down, there is something there to pick you back up, whether it be God, your community, or the combination of both. Right. I think that's powerful, but yeah. 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 Falling is an important part. That only happens by trying, like you said. Beautiful, yeah. It's not going to happen without it. Yeah. We say in Hebrew, Yerida L'tzorech Aliyah, another basic Kabbalistic concept, which means that a descent or fall is only for the purpose of a climb, of an ascent. Yes. And that there's no such thing, really, when you think about it, as an actual fall. Because if the fall is just a necessary step to greater climbing, then that's just part of the climbing. So, my spiritual teacher and leader, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, of blessed memory, who's the leader of the Chabad movement, would say this all the time, that there's no such thing as really falling. And that the crisis that you experience in life and the fall that you experience is part of your story. It's part of your climb. And your responsibility is to figure out how to contextualize it, how to make it part of your story, how to own it, and to make it part of your launching pad to some greater success, some greater insight that you have into what your life is all about. So, yeah. And that only happens by trying. Yeah. Otherwise, like you say, sitting at home, you're not going to fall. No. But you're also not going to climb anywhere. Right. You're just going to, but yeah, getting in the arena. Okay. So now someone's listening, they're thinking or watching, what is Judaism? I know that's a very broad question, so I'm not asking you specifically that, because that's tough to answer. But what would you like someone to know who knows that Jewish people and Judaism exists, obviously, right, but is not sure what the religion is based on, what are the most important practices, things like that. Does that make sense? Yeah. So to the very
basic definition of Judaism would be that God has appointed the Jewish people to observe a covenant between himself and them. A covenant meaning like a contract, so to speak, would be what we call it today, let's say. But obviously much deeper than a contract. It's a bond that's inseparable, that God gave the Jewish people a set of responsibilities, which we call the Torah. The Torah is also known as the Bible. So Christians might know it as the Old Testament, but that's the 5 books of Moses and its attendant commentaries. That is the Torah. Torah literally means instruction. And so God gave this manual or instruction, so to speak, to the Jewish people to observe and to enact in the world. And it contains 613 commandments, as well as innumerable offshoots and responsibilities. And a Jewish person is meant to strive to live by that instruction within the world, and to do so in the trajectory of history is supposed to bring to perfect the world. It's supposed to heal the world from its kind of original trauma. And Judaism allows or places a mandate really on its members to fulfill that law, so to speak, or to fulfill that guide for living, and thereby to perfect their own personal world, which in a sense contributes to the perfection of the entire world. And those observances are, like I said, 613. There's innumerable amount of commandments. But for the sake of simplifying, we might say that there's two categories. There's the commandments that are interpersonal, which means commandments that govern relationships between people, and then commandments between human being and God, so spiritual obligations. So for example, the Sabbath. The Sabbath means every 7th day, the person has to rest and not engage in any creative labor. And that's why Jews who keep the Sabbath won't turn on electricity, they won't drive in the car, they won't write. They'll just spend the day kind of in a spiritual oasis, studying, spending time with family, praying, enjoying meals together. That's an example of a commandment which is between man and God, meaning it's a spiritual obligation. It doesn't necessarily govern our interpersonal relationships. Then commandments that cover kind of civil law and damages, those kind of commandments that come from the Torah, those are interpersonal. Love your fellow as yourself. That's probably the most famous commandment in the Torah. That's an example of an interpersonal commandment. So you have this structure of the Torah, you have this bond between the Jewish person and God and their responsibility to fulfill these commandments in everyday life. So those are the 3 elements, I would say. There's the connection between God and the Jewish person, and between the Jewish person and the Torah. And all 3 are interconnected. And of course, I mean, I'm not going on about this, but Jewish history is just a whole other subject, really, about how has the Jew existed in history.
Please.
What is their place in history? No, let's just stop for now. Try to break it down a little.
Okay.
Yeah.
From what I feel about Judaism, it's more of a religion that's based on action, right? It's an action-based religion.
That's why I said it's like 613 commandments. It's just very heavily
behavior-based. That's why I resonated with it. Well, one, because my family is, and that's how we grew up, and the traditions and the customs are all very fun and exciting, and the bar mitzvah and all that stuff in my family. But now as someone who sort of was not very spiritual or religious for a long time while I was in college and being a professional wrestler, that wasn't part of my purview.
Right.
And then when my sister passed away, I needed something to blame it on. So why not blame it on God? And then my aunt actually said something very profound, which is well, if you're blaming it on God, that means you believe in God. And I thought about that for a long time.
Right.
I was like, oh, that makes sense. And my dad is always the synagogue is where he's his place of comfort. That's where all his people are. So he's been going for as long as I can remember. And so then I started to think about, okay, well, if more bad things happen, how will I be better prepared in terms of having a faith, a sense of founding or a foundation, something to lean on.
Right.
So then I listen and learn and read a bunch of stuff, as I feel like I'm trying to gain a bunch of knowledge, especially from this podcast. And then you learn that basically Judaism is a religion based on action. And I love that. Not based on like the words you say, they're important, but it's how you back them up or what you do in the world that actually matters the most.
Right.
And so, yeah, long-winded statement. I don't know if there's a question mixed in there, but just sort of how I fell back into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then living with Joel at this house was also very good for me.
Yeah.
You know, Joel,
he's a good influence.
He's a good man. He's a good man.
Yeah.
And you know, he was working his way through some things while living in here, and so was I, and it was helpful for us to do that together. And so. And I recently listened to this like 16-part series on Daily Wire about Exodus.
Okay.
It was
Who gave it?
Jordan Peterson was like the head guy.
Okay.
And Dennis Prager was in there. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah, sure.
And a bunch of other just scholars.
Okay.
And they only went over Exodus.
Yeah.
Which was cool. I like that. Like once you feel like you're free, you actually have to then go through the desert to find your way to actually who you are. And I think a lot of people have to make that journey through the desert or through Exodus to figure out who they are. Like they finally got free, whatever freedom means. Right. But freedom without any sort of constraints is not really freedom. Right. So that was an interesting thing.
Yeah, what's missed about that narrative of Exodus is that people always quote, Moses' words to Pharaoh, "Let my people be free." But there's another half of the sentence which people don't quote, which is Tavdin Asalakim ala harazeh, which in Hebrew, the original Hebrew, which Moses says, or God says to Pharaoh through Moses, "Let my people go so that they can serve me." So it's like, yes, let them go from this servitude to enter into another servitude, right? Basically, they go from Egypt to Mount Sinai, where they get given this code of 613 commandments, and they're obligated in these, at times very strenuous obligations. Yeah. So it's like, do we just exchange one slaver for the other, or like it kind of makes people confused, I think. And so we tend not to quote it. It's more like, oh, just be free of everything. That's what's important. But we don't realize, like you're saying, is that freedom does not mean you're free of obligation. Freedom just means you're free to express your own essential self. And if your own essential self is your connection with God, and that's the reality of your being, then fulfilling God's desire and will is the expression of your actual free self. So, right, you're in a relationship now, thank God, and you're getting married. Thank God, yes, so, that's right. In a relationship, we don't think of the obligations that we have to our partner as constricting. We think of them as the way to really express our connection with each other. Even the very fact of monogamy, right? Which is like, well, in fact, that's very constricting. There's only one person now. But that's actually a way of expressing my complete dedication to you, right? So the thing that is constricting is also channeling this intense dedication and love. And so in all areas of life, there's all sorts of constrictions which are meant to channel the essence of ourselves to the surface. And so when you leave one constricting set of, let's say, a pharaoh, whoever your pharaoh is, everyone has their own taskmaster and their own. Everyone's battling their own set of tyranny. Everyone's enslaved, right? Yep. And becoming free doesn't mean not having any obligation. It means finding the set of regulation and behavior that's going to best express the essence of your soul. Yeah. Your Mount Sinai. Yeah. Because I think people get mixed up, like when they make no choice. Making no choice is still a choice. Because someone's still running your life. Why not it be you? Right. Why not you be? Because there's consequences to action and inaction. Normally the consequences to action pay much greater reward in a longer time than the consequences of inaction. Right. So, but I think of the constraints thing in sports. Like I played baseball for a long time. If there were no rules in baseball, it wouldn't be nearly as fun. What the fuck would I do? I just hit the ball and no one throws it to any base, and I just run around in a circle and someone can peg me with the ball and I don't know which base to go to. I don't know if I score or run. Like, does it seem very fun? Yeah. But it's defined lines but in those defined lines, there's a bunch of freedom. I can bunt. I can hit a single. Yeah. I can throw here. I can go this way. That's what makes sports so beautiful, is the ability to be creative within the boundaries, to use them to your benefit. Exactly. The way pitchers use whatever kind of subterfuge or misdirection that they can to use the rules themselves. Right.
Yeah,
To fool the
baseball's
betters.
baseball's funny.
Yeah, every sport has that.
Yeah, because baseball for hundreds of years, the
Mhm.
undertone of baseball is cheating.
Right.
Whether it be, pine tar on the hat, stealing the signs, steroids.
How do you feel about the pitch clock?
I like it because I know that it's
For the
going.
consumer, or do you like it for the game?
I like it for both
Mhm.
because I'm a diehard baseball fan. I'm not going to leave.
Right.
I'm not going to stop watching no matter what. And they don't need to worry about me and the
Right.
others like me.
Right.
They won't need to worry about the young boy who just is on his TikTok, but he has like another game over here, and now he's looking at baseball, and they've got about 18 seconds to hook him.
Yeah.
And if that whole time the pitcher's just walking around the mound, they've lost him.
Yeah.
And now we've lost a kid who might play baseball.
Mhm.
And that's such a cool thing to learn about life is baseball, I think, because I played it. But yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Let me take a drink. So, is there anything else you would want someone to know about Judaism?
I mean, I could be here all day and tomorrow.
Well,
We'll talk about Judaism. Why not?
let's see. Let me get
narrow
more.
it
Let me
down.
get more concrete. Why is Israel important to the Jews?
Okay, that's interesting. Israel is important.
I don't know why I jumped there, but
Yeah.
that's where I jumped.
Israel. So the third element of Jewish peoplehood is, so we mentioned the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
We mentioned God and the relationship between God and the Jewish people. And Israel is the, how do you say this? Is the lab where the Jewish people were meant to enact this law in the real world. So like you said, action is the main thing in Judaism.
Mm-hmm.
Judaism gives us a vision in the Torah to build a society that is a vision of how God wants society to look. So all the law, so there's a large segment of the Torah is actually agricultural law, which concerns the obligations of the people that live in the land of Israel, which God was taking them from Egypt to the desert, gave them the law, gave them the Torah, then brought them to the land of Israel to enact this law in real life. So Israel is meant to be this kind of model society for what a divine society should look like. What does society look like when every single person believes that every other person is a part of the divine?
Mm.
What does it look like when we have ultimate respect for each other with no ego in between, which is, let's say, the ultimate ideal of the Torah? So all the laws of the Torah are meant to kind of build a society within the land of Israel, which can then be, so to speak, expanded to the rest of the world. There's a very interesting statement from the Talmudic sages, going back 2,000 years, which says that in the world to come, meaning at the end of history, the land of Israel will expand to the entire world, which is basically some kind of metaphysical statement saying that the ideals that were meant to be lived out in the land of Israel should become the inheritance of the world as a whole. Because God viewed the land of Israel as this ideal place, the sacred place, where the Jewish people can enact and live out this divine society. Now, did that happen in real life? If you study the rest of the scripture of the Jewish Bible, the Old Testament, you have all the books of the prophets, which tell us basically the Jewish history in the land of Israel during 2,000-3,000 years ago, where there's just failure after failure, like we talked about. You have to try it. You have to do something to fail, and the Jewish people often failed in that odyssey, in that endeavor to build this perfect divine society. They had failure in the relationship with God. They had failure in the relationship amongst each other, and so periodically they would be driven from the land, so to speak. That the land expelled them on its own, because the land, as Jewish teaching says, it could not contain or handle this undivine society the Jewish people were living in. This is not what this is for. You're not using it correctly. So it would be expelled into exile. And then they came back and they were expelled again. Now we're back again for a third round. But that's the centrality of the land of Israel and Jewish thought, is that's the arena where Jewish life is meant to unfold and to build this divine society. At the same time, like I said, that Israel is also a metaphysical idea which should be applied everywhere. So that we should have this, one of the Hasidic masters, Kabbalistic masters in Russia, was asked by this is in the 1800s, was asked by a follower of his. He said, I want to go to the land of Israel. I want to make aliyah, it's called. I want to ascend. I want to go to this higher spiritual plateau and settle in the land of Israel, like many people did in the 1800s and 1900s. And his master told him, no, you shouldn't go. Rather, you should make here Israel. Machta Eretz Israel. Create your own spiritual oasis of Israel, so to speak, here in Russia, or here in America, or wherever you are. Wherever a person lives, like we're talking about in the beginning about a mission. Every single person is endowed with this mission to create this version of a perfected society in their own corner of the universe, wherever they live. So you make Israel here, meaning you build this ideal divine society in Plano, wherever you're found. You don't need to flee to go somewhere else to fulfill your essential task in life. Where you're put is where you're supposed to be.
That's precisely what you guys are doing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. So that goes back to the mandate of Chabad, which, like we said, is a sect within a sect. It's hard to break down in 30 seconds. But the
so is all of these questions I'm asking you.
But Chabad, specifically, the Chabad movement was born in White Russia in the 1770s. So it's almost 300 years old. And it's a branch of the Hasidic movement, which was born in the early 1700s, which the best way to describe it is like a spiritual revival amongst the Jewish people, kind of a refocus, a group of people which are refocused on joy and on simplicity and on connection with God, as opposed to losing God and spirituality in the details of law, which tended to happen. In other words, when you have a society which is so focused on law and study and Talmudic study, it's possible to lose the spirit of the law. And the Hasidic movement was a revolution that brought back spirituality to Judaism, in a sense. The Chabad movement is a movement within the Hasidic movement, who's become famous for, who's the Rebbe, the last leader of the Chabad movement, passed away in 1994, basically made the mandate of Chabad to become, like you're saying, to become messengers, to become ambassadors within communities all over the world, to create a space of Jewish revival wherever they settle down. So there's, let's say, 5,000-6,000 emissaries or messengers of the Rebbe who settle down in communities like Plano or in like Iceland or in Queens, or literally pick any city or country in the world, Dubai now.
Yeah.
And
well, that's really cool.
Yeah, anywhere, really anywhere, and settle down and open up a center basically where they non-judgmentally cater to every single Jew who wants to know more about Judaism, to kind of bring them closer and reignite, rediscover the beauty of their own tradition. That's the idea of making Israel here.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
Yeah.
What makes someone Jewish?
Makes someone Jewish, in the classical Jewish tradition, is someone who has a Jewish soul, which means that they're born essentially to a Jewish mother. That's the way that's been since the beginning, for 3,000 years. So it's interesting, kind of, you may know that there's 12 tribes of the Jewish people. And there's, you have Kohanim and Leviim, which means there's a priestly class, there's the Levites, there's regular Jews, there's kind of all these tribal identities. That's determined by the father. So if your father is a Kohen, then you're a Kohen. If your father was a Levite, you're a Levite. If your father was just an Israelite, a regular Jew, then that's who you are. In the days when we actually knew who belonged to which tribe, 12 different tribes, that would be determined by the father. But the essential fact of your Jewishness is determined by your mother. Meaning that the mother is the one who creates the life and is giving the essential life to the human being. So that's why the essential fact of who you are, if you are Jewish, that's determined by the mother, the one who gives you life itself. So if you would have a non-Jewish father and a Jewish mother, you would still be Jewish.
Technically, you have a Jewish soul.
Right.
Yeah, what a miracle that is.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. Metaphysical mysteries in the universe.
Okay, so now let's get into sort of the different branches of Judaism.
Okay.
So I think mostly in America, you have Reform Jews, you have conservative Jews, and you have Orthodox Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And then does Hasidic and Chabad break off from Orthodox?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so
At least
the
that's
phenomenon
what I know.
of denominations within Judaism, like you've just described, is a relatively recent, in the span of Jewish history, a recent phenomenon.
Okay.
So we're talking about Germany in the late early 1800s, really accelerated really only in the 1900s, where you have the idea of Reform Judaism, meaning a branch of people which felt that Judaism had to be rewritten to stay relevant. That's what a Reformation is, right? We're going to change the fundamentals in order to make it sure that it stays relevant. So, for example, people in Germany in the 1800s felt like in order to become accepted by the wider society, we have to kind of erase what makes us individual as Jews and try to model our religion more after the dominant faith, which is Christianity. And so you have synagogues which resemble churches, and you have organs, and you have choirs that kind of are trying to mimic the culture that is around them because they want to become fully accepted. So you have the phenomenon of Reformation, which says, let's erase, so to speak, the parts of Judaism which make us uncomfortable. Let's change them, and so that Judaism can remain relevant. So it's a noble impulse, just saying that we want to keep our Judaism sharp and relevant. Ultimately, from a traditional perspective, it's too deep a compromise on the essentials. But like I was saying, the denominations are recent development in the terms of in 3,000 years of history.
Right.
And what I would say is that there's not to speak of, there isn't really any division between one Jew and another in terms of, like we're talking about the Jewish soul. The essence of the Jew remains the same,
Right.
no matter what, no matter if they are fully observant or not observant at all or anti-observant. The essence of the soul remains the same no matter what. And so really to speak of denominations is a little misleading because that sounds like, oh, you're this, you're that, you're Orthodox, you're conservative, you're Chabad, you're Hasidic, you're Reform. Those are just labels that distract us from what we really are, which is Jews. If you have a bunch of colored glasses of water, if you have red, orange, blue glasses, and you pour water into all of them, they look different, but really they're not different at all.
Yeah.
And so people like labels because it allows us to pick an identity. But ultimately, I try to stay away from it.
Mm-hmm.
And I just see all Jews as in a relationship with God that either they're developing or they're not aware of yet. And all we can do as Jews and human beings is hope to grow every day, become more connected and more expressive of our identity. That's Jews as Jews, if that's as Gentiles or non-Jews, that's as non-Jews. We all have our own task and our mission in the world, and that's all we can do, is to fulfill that mission.
Mm. Yeah, because no matter where sort of you're at, your relationship with your Judaism or with God can always be strengthened.
Right.
That's sort of a never-ending journey.
Yeah.
You're never.
Like you said, if you're not climbing, you're not. If you're not going up, you're not. You're basically going down.
Right.
Right. If you're not climbing.
Yeah, I mean, I relate it to sort of, I work a lot in mental health.
Right.
So when you start to get proactive with your mental health, you start to take care of it. You start to build a set of daily practices and tools, and then you start to feel good and better. And you're like, oh, wow, I've never felt like this. That's not when the work stops.
No.
That's really when it just begins.
Right.
Because now you're not going to ever get there. You're just like looking at this like beautiful light post that's like in the middle of the ocean. You're always just like slowly climbing towards it.
Right.
And that's it, right? And that's the work. And that's what you're trying to teach at your Chabad, right?
Right.
Doing classes and talking to people and trying to strengthen their relationship with themselves and with their divine and with God and all of that.
Yeah, it's a beautiful story that's kind of to what you were just saying, where one of the Chabad rabbis, so there's 7 generations of Chabad leaders. So one year was after Yom Kippur, the holiday of Jewish forgiveness, right? So once a year, there's a day of Kippur, which means atonement, where Jews fast, right? Don't eat anything, don't drink anything, spend the day meditating, praying, And that's the Day of Atonement. That's the day where God, so to speak, grants forgiveness after the person has engaged in repentance, or in basically trying to reclaim the essential purity of our own selves. So it was one year that Yom Kippur was finished, and one of the children of one of the Rebbes went in to see his father, and he asked him, okay, so like, what do we do next? We did Yom Kippur, like what's next on our spiritual agenda? So he said, oh, now, teshuvah, meaning returning, repentance, it only begins now. You think that you finish Yom Kippur, you've kind of gained atonement, it's a blank slate. Now is when teshuvah actually begins. Now is when repentance actually begins. That's just it was just a warm-up. Once you've kind of regained your essential purity, or your essential child, that's when the build-up begins. That's when the work begins.
Absolutely.
Start building from the top, from the bottom.
Yeah, because you become aware that you can do the work. Right. And so then you go out and you try to do it.
Right. Yeah, it's sometimes that could be itself daunting. You know, the realization that you actually can change things becomes itself, in a way, traumatizing, because now I have this set of as long as you think that you're not in control and that you can't do anything to improve your own life, then it's kind of, in a way, you get comfortable with that.
Yeah.
And it frees you from anything.
Well, you can just wrap yourself in sort of this blanket of cynicism. Yeah. And say, I can't change anything, everything's shit, and have this sort of nihilistic view of the world. Right. Then when you don't go talk to that girl that you think is pretty because you know she's going to reject you. Don't try to get the job because you know you're not going to change anything about it. It's fine. It's comfortable. It's easy. Right. But when you actually sit down and say, no, I do actually matter. You do. Like we said, you said there's a divine spark in each of you that you have to uniquely express. Yeah. And if you don't uniquely express that, the world is worse off because of it.
Right. And that becomes, in a way, that having that realization could be scary.
Very scary.
Because now I have to do something.
I have this responsibility to myself, to my community, to the world, to potentially God, if that's how you phrase it. Right? It's like, holy fuck. Right. What if I mess up? Yeah. What if I don't do the right thing? Yeah. You know, what if I say the wrong thing? What if I don't go around the right path?
Yeah, that's going back to Exodus. This is a teaching. I don't know if they talked about this on the Daily Wire thing, but it's one of the lesser known teachings from the sages on Exodus says that 3/5 of the Jewish people didn't actually leave Egypt.
Oh, really?
So 3/5 stayed behind in Egypt because they were too afraid to go. So this is really comfortable. I'm a slave, but I know where I'm getting my food from. I know what my daily routine is going to look like. I'm not in charge of myself, but out there in the desert, that's unknown. That's scary. What am I going to eat? Matzah? Like, how long is the matzah going to last, you know?
Right.
What am I going to drink? And so later on, one of the prophets has this beautiful quote where he's conveying God's message to the Jewish people. He says, God is saying, I remember the kindness of your youth, meaning at the beginning of your nationhood, when you followed me into the desert, into unsown land. That takes a lot of dedication to go out into the open with freedom, with nothing to fall back on, besides for faith. So, yeah, in other words, most of the Jewish people were too afraid to seize freedom.
That's very interesting.
Because freedom is a scary thing.
It is scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is? I know we took a class on happiness.
Yeah.
What does Judaism say about trying to live a happy life?
Good question. Well, if you remember from that, one of the main insights of the course was actually a teaching from the Zohar, which is the basic mystical Jewish text, which taught this beautiful insight that the Hebrew word for happiness, which is simcha, if you rearrange those letters, it spells the word machshava, which means thought. In other words, that thought and happiness are interchangeable, the same letters, because what is responsible for happiness is our thoughts. Our external reality could be the same, could not change, but our thought process can, and that itself can make us happy. Happiness is internal. It's not necessarily contingent on the external facts of our life. And so, being happy, which is extremely important to Judaism. In fact, one of the cardinal principles of Judaism is Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha, which means serve God with joy. That everything you do has to be suffused with a sense of joy, because how could it not? If you see yourself as an ambassador of the divine, that should bring you joy every day.
Yeah.
And the fact that you have that level of worth, that itself should be enough to wake up in the morning. And we have this prayer that we wake up in the morning. Have you heard of Modani? Have you heard of the Jewish morning prayer?
Mm-mm.
So there's a small little text, small little prayer that we say upon awakening. The first thing we do when we wake up. It's like a thankfulness prayer. Don't my phone on me. It's Moda Ani Lefanecha, Melech Chai V'Kayam, She'achzarta Bi Nishmati, B'chem L'Rabba Munatecha, which means, Moda Ani, I thankfully acknowledge before you, God, She'achzarta Lefanecha, She'achzarta Li Nishmati, that you've given back my soul, you've returned my soul to me, with great faithfulness, because of your faith within me, so to speak, which means it's a short prayer saying, thank you, God, for giving me back my soul again for another day, which is an indication of how much you believe in me. That you believe that I'm worthy to have this soul and this life again to do something incredible.
Wow.
So
I love that.
when you think of that, that's a very important prayer to incorporate, at least in this daily. Like the first thought is a thought of gratitude.
Yeah.
The first thought is a thought of gratitude and responsibility. Right? I thank you for giving me this incredible gift of life. And with that comes the faith that you have in me.
Yeah.
You've, right? Nothing is more empowering to a child than the fact that their parent has faith in them. Right?
Yeah.
That's the biggest gift you can give your child, God willing, is the knowledge that you believe they're capable. You believe that they are divine, really.
Yeah.
If you can impress that upon yourself and upon your children, then that's a thought process to create happiness and contentment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you view joy, contentment, and happiness all in the same vein, or are they different?
We could start to splice them, but I don't see a reason to get too technical. Happiness, joy. How would do you see a distinction between joy and happiness in English, at least? I mean, in Hebrew, there's differences in different nouns for happiness that imply communal happiness or individual happiness.
Happiness is interesting,
Yeah.
because it's not something that I actively chase.
Right.
Because then I might never have it.
Right.
But it's something that I more try and bring joy into my life.
Mm-hmm.
Try to bring joy into my life to create happiness.
Right.
That's sort of how I see it happening.
Yeah. No, happiness is not an end in itself. It's not it's not a destination that you're trying to grab. But it is essential to in other words, if the purpose of life is to fulfill this mission, say, as a divine being, then happiness is essential, because if you're depressed, God forbid, right? Or if you're the first Chabad Rebbe, the founder of the Chabad movement, has a very important text called the Tanya, which is kind of his magnum opus, his guide for the Hasidic community. And in it, he talks about happiness and anxiety. And he says, imagine two wrestlers. Oh, this is good. And I just thought of this. Imagine two people wrestling, and one of them is, let's say, one of them is much stronger than the other, much more physical brute strength. But he is slow moving and anxious. He's depressed, and the other person is quick moving, is happy, he's light on his feet.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to win.
Most likely,
the happy one's going to win. The one who's full of life is going to win,
right?
Because you're not going to, yeah. And so he says, in the battle that we have every day, that's the central tenet of the book, is that each one of us is engaged in a perpetual battle between our two selves. Right? We have the divine self, which you've spoken about, this divine fragment. We also have what he calls an animal soul, a natural self, the part that wants to stay at home and not do anything, the part of us that wants to regress to our worst natural instincts, the parts of us that's egotistical and selfish and just wants our own gratification. That's our animal self. And you have this internal battle between your divine soul and your animal soul. And it's perpetual. It's never going to end, actually. It says you're actually going to be, your divine soul will never truly conquer your animal soul. And so you're going to be engaged in a battle for life, where every day you're going to be seeking to empower your divine self to be how you behave today. And in that battle, if you're experiencing anxiety or sadness, or if you're feeling unsure, then you're not going to you're not going to be able to win. You have to have a sense of clear-headed joy in order to overcome this existential battle that we have within ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And so joy is an essential ingredient to live a purposeful life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, joy is just it's the purest manifestation of self-worth. It's when you truly believe that you matter. That itself is the happiest thing.
There's nothing else that can.
Yeah, and that's not obviously not like happy like I won the game or happy like I got a raise. That's just a short burst of endorphins. That's not happiness. Happiness is a sense of purpose, of belonging, of knowing where you are in the world.
Yeah. This is a deep sense of undeniable self-worth.
Right. Yeah.
That no one can take away from you.
Right.
No matter what.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Beautiful. So you mentioned the Kabbalah.
Right.
I've been trying to learn more about it, but it's quite difficult and it's quite complex.
It is. Yeah.
It is. I've read.
People ask me for a good book for Kabbalah all the time, and
I've read a couple. I'm not sure I learned anything from it because it's just like I don't know. I found it very complicated.
Yeah. And
I'm not someone who says I don't understand something. I didn't really understand much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Then I've been trying to listen to this guy on the internet. His name is Rabbi Mordechai.
Mordechai what?
Mordechai Finley.
Okay.
Or the other way around.
Yeah.
And so I started listening to his lectures on it. He's going through the whole thing. I haven't gone through
I'll give you some more.
Just starting at the introduction, but not going to have you go through the whole Kabbalah here. But what does it mean? How does it intertwine with Judaism and it's sort of the spiritual mysticism or spiritual psychology of Judaism?
So Kabbalah means to receive. That's what the word means. And what that's referring to is a received tradition that's passed down through Jewish history of, like you said, the mystical dimension of Judaism. The way that Kabbalah itself defines it, like I said, the Zohar. The Zohar means the book of light, of splendor. That's the foundational text of Jewish mysticism. The Zohar says that only a fool looks at a person and thinks that they are their garments, they are their clothing. Right? Someone a little deeper knows that there's a body beneath the clothing. There's a person there.
Mm-hmm.
And only a foolish and you're slightly more foolish, or less foolish rather, if you just think that the body is the entirety of the person. There's a soul. There's a personality that you have to get to know. That's the real essence of the person. So when you see a person, you see their clothing, you see their body, you don't see their soul immediately. And the same thing applies within Judaism. It says that the laws of Judaism, or rather the stories of the Torah, the narratives, those are like the clothing. And the law of Judaism, the ritual, that's the body, very essential. But the soul of Judaism, that's mysticism, that's Kabbalah. In other words, what is the animating force behind these laws? What's the psychology behind these laws? What's the spiritual purpose of this whole edifice of Judaism? So Kabbalah is a mystical, I guess you could call it esoteric wisdom that was passed down together with the law of Judaism from generation to generation. And the reason why it was passed down, meaning it wasn't written down, it was passed down secretly, was because it was thought to be dangerous or too deep for the average person to relate to. And therefore it was kept hidden as esoteric wisdom. But
dangerous in a sense, like too powerful for
could be misused, could be misunderstood.
Okay.
Like nuclear energy. Oppenheimer on the subject.
Yeah.
So and then not recently, but in the 1500s, 1600s, and then more accelerated in the Hasidic movement in the 1800s, there began a movement to reveal the Kabbalah, to say that actually now we actually need this more than ever. So there was a time period where this had to be concealed, a time period where this wisdom was not meant to be accessible, but now as the world has gotten increasingly darker, we need more light.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden the Kabbalah is now mitzvah legalot zot hachachma, as you say in Hebrew, as one of the great Kabbalists said. It's a mitzvah or a commandment to reveal this wisdom. And that's what the Hasidic movement really sought to do, which is to make relevant this mystical wisdom to the everyday person. Now the question, of course, is what does Kabbalah consist of? What is this wisdom? And that's what you're encountering some difficulties with.
Yeah.
and it is quite deep, obviously.
Yeah, it's meant
There's
to
a
be.
whole parallel vision of worlds and spiritual entities and hierarchies and personas, and it's there's a reason why it was hidden for so long. But it describes the process of creation and the purpose of the human being within creation, and the function of the mitzvah, of the commandments, and what they achieve spiritually and psychologically within the world. There's a lot in Kabbalah. For example, did you read about Tzimtzum? Have you read Tzimtzum? No. It's probably the building block of Kabbalah. It's the concept of Tzimtzum, which means, it's a Hebrew word, which means contraction.
Okay.
And what the theology of Tzimtzum says is that for God to create the world, he had to engage in an effort of absolute contraction of himself to make space for a universe to exist. So if I want to just describe this in godly terms, it's not going to come across too well, but thankfully we have parables.
Right.
So Hasidic wisdom employs the following parable. It says, imagine you have a classroom.
Okay.
And you have a teacher. You have a PhD in physics or math, whatever, coming to teach first grade. And the Einstein gets in there, wherever it is, and he is just teaching, what he knows, how he knows it in his language.
Right.
There are people in the room. There's a bunch of 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, but there's no communication happening.
Right.
Nothing's being created. He's not doing anything. There's nothing is being changed or affected or built in the mind of the child. It's almost, in fact, that the child doesn't exist. The child is just a person there that's being spoken to. There's no communication.
Right.
But what does this Einstein, this PhD, have to do? He has to erase, so to speak, all of his advanced knowledge, right? And inhabit the mind of a child. Think, how can I explain whatever it is I want to explain to a 7-year-old? I have to forget what it's like to think like a PhD student in physics. I have to really think. I have to vacate my mind of that knowledge, of that reality, which is my reality. I have to leave it aside and think, how does a 5-year-old see things? And start to take out toys to be able to convey simple addition.
Right.
Right? In fact, it says that the wiser the teacher, he'll be able to reach the lowest student. In other words, if you could only explain your field of study to someone else, to your peers, but not to someone who doesn't have that knowledge, that's an indication that you don't fully have that knowledge.
Right.
You have to be able to really address it. So the teacher, in a way, has to contract or disapparate, from his own wisdom, and speak on the level of the child to be able to create anything, to be able to start building something within the mind of the child. In a similar way, Kabbalah says, if God were to bring a world out into existence, right, and his own reality were to be unchanged, then the world would not exist. Meaning, if God is everywhere, this is the basic Kabbalistic concept, is that God is all of existence. There is nothing else besides for God. In the beginning, there was nothing. God brought out existence from absolute nothingness into something. Mm-hmm. So if God is all there is, if God is that mind of the professor in the classroom, and then he brings out a universe, the universe will be obliterated in the presence of God.
Right.
How can we act if we just see the divine reality, so to speak, everywhere? We would have no sense of control, no sense of freedom. We would just see the divine reality for what it is. We would lose all sense of consciousness, all sense of who we are. We would be obliterated in the face of the divine reality, just like the child would be totally unmoored with the professor just speaking gibberish to him. So God, in the act of creation, had to hide himself. And he performed what's called tzimtzum, which means this immense contraction, where his light, so to speak, or rather his presence, is not detectable anymore. So I'm going to erase all my presence within the universe, the fact of my existence, and bring out a world into this space of emptiness where it would be possible for the beings within this world to not even realize that there's a God, to feel as if we are totally autonomous, to feel as if that we exist on our own. We don't even know where we come from. We don't feel like we don't feel like we have an intestine. We don't feel like we came from something. We know we came from our mothers, but we don't feel connected in that way. We feel as if we always existed, right? Our consciousness is like we are because we are. And Kabbalah explains that's a mystery, that mystery is possible because God vacated himself in the act of creation. He made space for us to exist. And to do so, he had to, so to speak, make himself invisible. And this is a foundational principle in Kabbalah, because what it means is that really God is everywhere, but we just can't detect it. And the job of the soul is to regain that reality. Is to come to the realization that everything is one. The idea of Kabbalistic oneness, which is that, well, the divine is within every single thing in this world, within me, within you, within the table, within this city, within this world. And to cultivate that awareness means to start to realize that we're all part of the same divine story. But first there has to be that tzimtzum, that invisibility, that contraction, which means in the sense that creation is tragic, because life in its beginning is tragic. There was a great invisibility. There's a great disappearance which happened, which is the awareness of who we really are, the awareness of God. And so, that's the original trauma. It's there from the beginning. There was, in other words, whatever we experience in our own lives, trauma is just replaying that original disappearance of God. And you feel like, how could God do this? Yeah, God already did it. He already became invisible. Yeah. And he just did it again. Whenever you experience that. And that's an example of a Kabbalistic narrative of the creation of the world.
And that's those teachings are intertwined in Hasidic teachings and how you go about being a rabbi. Yeah.
So my frame of reference is Hasidic teaching and Kabbalah, as Judaism is refracted through that lens.
And that's how you guide people on their spiritual journeys.
Yeah.
Is through that
the
lens.
The teachings of Hasidus, which is a distillation of Kabbalistic teaching. It's an elaboration. Yeah. So tzimtzum is one example of just trying to give you a sample.
Yeah. Very good.
There's way more than that in this story itself.
Well, there's much deeper levels to all of the things we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
But this is sort of your basic introductory level.
It's not even basic, but it's a little more than, right?
I think it's a little more than basic.
A little more than basic.
I think so. I think it's much more, but I think it's been great. So again, self-indulgent. Just having you over just to learn from you.
We could do much more Kabbalah stuff.
Speaking of another, I think, important part of Judaism that a lot of people know but maybe not fully grasp is what we're wearing on our head.
Okay.
The kippah.
Yeah, the kippah. So that we could just tie it into what we were just saying. The kippah is skull cap, just a covering that you wear over your head, and the basic symbolism of the kippah is to be aware that there is something above us. In other words, to be aware of the fact that we're present within this divine reality, that we're not uncovered, so to speak, that we're not just alone. So the awareness that there is a higher calling, a higher being that is expecting something of you, that's given responsibility to you. That's the idea of the head covering, that there's something above you. That's the physical reminder of that.
Yeah. And then there's also the tallis or the tzitzit that you wear all the time.
Right.
Yeah, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see a little bit of it.
Strength.
Most people, some or not, I don't know the right term, but people throw it over their shoulders when they walk into synagogue.
Right. So when you pray, you wear this shawl, which has 4 corners and a number of strings attached to the corners. And that's again a reminder. It's a little technical, but the numerology of the strings amount to the number 613, which is again a reminder of the commandments. The 613 commandments. It's kind of a physical. The talit, which kind of surrounds you, is a kind of expression of God's encompassing love. And the strings, which are the commandments, are like our responsibility towards God in that relationship. A reminder of 613 ways that we are called upon to reciprocate that love. So that's the talent. It's all technical, more technical stuff.
Yeah, beautiful.
Yeah.
And then one more thing.
Yeah.
I mentioned at the start of the podcast that we did some tefillin before we started recording.
Yeah.
I think that's I said I would mention it, what it means.
We can just show it.
Yeah.
So the tefillin is a very basic, important Jewish ritual. All Jewish males from the age 13 and up do the tefillin. So the tefillin is basically two boxes, leather boxes. One is affixed to the head above the mind. The other goes on the left arm opposite the heart. And it has straps which go down the arm, 7 straps on the forearm, 3 on the upper arm. So it's a total of 10, which is also connected to the Kabbalah, the 10 divine faculties. We're not going to get into that now.
Oh, wow.
So with it inside the tefillin box, you have parchment upon which is written by a ritual scribe in a very specific way, very beautiful handwriting. They write the Shema. The Shema is the basic declaration of Jewish faith. It comes from the book of Deuteronomy.
You would say the Shema is the most...
This is the basic Jewish prayer, part of the Torah. The basic line is Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, which means Hear, O Israel. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. Just like I was talking before about the Kabbalistic idea of oneness, that all of reality is really part of God, that God is within everything. That's the idea of this first line of the Shema. That God is one means not that there's one God and not two. It means that, no, God is one with everything. There is no separateness within creation. It's all a mirage. Whenever we perceive difference, ego, differentiation, argumentation, that's covering over the oneness of God. The task is to get to the oneness, to find the interconnectedness between all of creation. That's the idea of the Shema. And so we wear that, we kind of physically wear that idea upon our minds and hearts during prayer in the morning. And the symbolism there is to kind of impart that mission statement of being an ambassador of oneness, bringing oneness within the world upon our arm, which is opposite our heart, our emotions, and our mind, and our brain, to kind of impress these ideas upon our daily behavior. So our mind, our thought, our emotion, and our action are aligned and are connected in this mission of bringing the idea of the Shema, the oneness of God, into the physical reality, how we behave every day. That's kind of the symbolism of the tefillin.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Thanks for bringing it over.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
How many times a day do you put it on?
Just once.
Just once?
Yeah.
In the morning?
Yeah. So you kind of just do the morning prayer with the tefillin. There are technically 3 prayers a day that Jewish people do. There's morning prayer, afternoon prayer, evening prayer.
And they're all different, or are they all the same?
They all have certain elements of... The main element of the prayer is same in all 3. But the morning prayer is longer, the afternoon prayer and the evening prayer are pretty brief. Yeah. But they all have the main text of the prayer is the same in all 3.
And which is?
Which is called the Shemona Esrei, 18 benedictions, 18 blessings.
Okay.
So it's a bit of a longish prayer, which is comprised of asking for our daily needs and expressing gratitude to God for fulfilling those needs.
Beautiful.
Yeah. That prayer is a whole other discussion.
Yeah, maybe next time.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything you think we missed that someone might need to know? Just off the top of your head, that's important. If not, I have one more question.
You have one more? So let's hear it first. Then
This is not about the Jewish religion at all.
Okay.
It's about Judaism, but...
Okay. I know some people are curious about what is the Jewish perspective on non-Jews.
Okay.
If your audience is mostly non-Jewish, what exactly has Judaism view the rest of the world? And like I referenced earlier, Judaism believes that every single person is created in the image of God, is given a divine soul and a fragment of God, and therefore has a mission within the world which is given to them by God. And for the Jewish person, that is to fulfill these 613 commandments, that is to live as a Jew. And for the non-Jewish person, there's what's called the 7 Noahide laws, meaning the 7 commandments that were given to, in the Bible, Noah, the very beginning of from the story of the flood, if you recall. And so those 7 commandments given to Noah are really for all of humanity. They're 7 laws of humanity, and they are basically the get into the specifics, but like believing in one God, establishing courts of justice, not having cruelty towards animals, not to kill or steal. Obviously, those are in there. Adultery, committed relationships, and so these laws are meant to kind of enforce a basic sense of civility and society within the world. And so so how does Judaism, to answer the question, how does Judaism view the role of a non-Jew within the world? It's the same as the Jew is, the same mission as the Jew, which is to be an ambassador of God's oneness within the world, within their sphere of activity. They're not obligated in the 613 commandments that the Jew is, but they're obligated in their own way, in their own responsibility to create a more beautiful world that is more reflective of the divine unity, just as the Jew is. And they each have their own role within the world. That's a question I get often.
That's good. That's beautiful.
Yeah. What was your question?
My final thing I wanted to talk about, if you're willing to speak on it, is anti-Semitism.
Okay.
Do you personally believe there's a rise in that? If so, maybe why do you think so? If you don't think there's a rise in it, fine. But also just general thoughts on it.
It's a good question. I mean, there is statistically a rise in anti-Semitism, and people are definitely more emboldened. I don't know if anti-Semitic sentiment is rising as much as the expression of the sentiment is rising. In other words, I don't know if there's an increasing amount of people that are having anti-Semitic feelings that didn't have before. I just think that those people which had those feelings are now feeling more emboldened to express it. And there could be a lot of different societal reasons for that, but I'm not a sociologist. I'm not going to get into why I think it's rising. For me, what's important is what's a Jew's response to anti-Semitism. And that is what the Rebbe always told us, which is to respond to darkness with more light.
Yeah.
And light means education, light means Jewish pride, light means being committed to who we are, to our identity. And so if I ever encounter anti-Semitism, the response is always education and pride. And that's how to bring more light to the world. If you would hope that if you sit down with someone who would be willing to listen to you, as they get to know you as a person, as they get to know your beliefs, you earn their respect. And maybe that's just one way to combat anti-Semitism on a personal level. Ultimately, it's difficult to reach individuals in that way, but things like this, shows like this, conversations like this, where people learn more about Judaism is an important step. So, I don't like to respond to anti-Semitism with wailing and woe is me and what are we going to do? This is an existential crisis, because fear doesn't, if your children or if your congregation or the people that are in your community feel that anti-Semitism is something to run from, or that this is like a crisis, then who wants to be part of a people in crisis? Who wants to be part of a depressing faith which is always on the run? People want, if you inspire confidence by saying we're going to fight darkness with light, that this is just an opportunity for us to educate, this opportunity is for us to express our own Jewish pride. That's what people I want to be part of. So, of course, anti-Semitism should be addressed on a political level or on a societal level, and that's for politicians, or it's for lawmakers, let's say. But the job of each one of us as individuals is to be a beacon of light in our own way, through education, through expressing our own Jewish pride, through doing tefillin and answering questions, and that's what we can do.
Because I think sort of the Jewish stereotypes that exist, they're probably always going to exist.
Right.
That's hard to do away with those. The frugal, the money, the big nose, things like that. Whatever it is, whatever you have your stereotype ingrained in about Jewish people. But if you happen to know a Jewish person or meet a Jewish person and they're proud of where they come from and their heritage and their religion and what they stand for, I think you're less likely to then just go and randomly make fun of them. Unless it's banter or a comedian, right? Some of those things have their place, obviously, right? Because comedians make fun of everyone. I think their truth is very important. But if you're just like being super cruel to be cruel, then that's a personal reflection on you, and there's needs to be much more to be done to change the way you view yourself and the world. But if you're just like randomly making these sort of little jab stereotypes, they still hurt. Like I've been getting on my whole life because I have a big nose and big ears, which I'm very proud of. But when I talk to people and meet people and they know that I'm Jewish, like it just sort of, it goes away because they're like, oh, this guy's just like he's proud of where he comes from and who he is. And so it just goes to what you're saying.
It's usually, anti-Semitism usually is a reflection more of the hater than the hated.
Oh, of course, always. When people comment,
his own insecurities or own
people comment on this podcast, they don't like it, they don't agree.
Yeah,
it's like totally fine. You can definitely say it in a normal way, but then I get it. Like I have empathy for that situation because you might be going through something that I know nothing about, and it's difficult to view that through a social media lens or just on a comment. But you try to be that sort of energy in the world that you can be. Yeah, but
that's good.
Yeah. All right, one last question. If you were going to put up a billboard in New York City, and millions of people were going to see that billboard every single day, what's going on it?
Oh, definitely what we started with. You are a divine soul.
You are a divine soul.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah, no question.
I love it. Yeah. Perfect way to end.
Beautiful.
Thanks, Rabbi.
This is wonderful.
I appreciate you joining me.
I enjoyed it.
We'll line up for round 2.
There we go.
And we'll get even more deep.
More Kabbalah.
Yeah, yes. Yeah. Please. But I got to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, I'll send you some better.
So I have some better questions to ask. But
books, it's hard to find a good Kabbalistic intro book, but there are some good podcasts. And
I'm trying to find them.
Some good podcasts and video series.
So, but where can people find you? Where's your synagogue?
So our synagogue is called Chabad at Legacy West, and our website is chabadlegacywest.com.
Yeah, that's linked. That'll be linked in the show notes if you want to.
Thank you.
If you want to find some Jewish learning or Jewish people.
Right.
And if you're familiar with this podcast, my old roommate Joel, he goes there frequently, so
that's right.
You can always contact him.
We'll see more of you now too.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, but thanks, Rabbi. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
See you guys. Cheers.
What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But above all else, most importantly, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.